And I tweeted, I said, when the FDIC finally approves banks to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, everybody will want to buy it, nobody will want to sell it, and you won't be able to afford it. Bitcoin's the best performing institutional grade asset of the year to date. It's up 344%. And that's an acceleration of 2x over its growth rate for the past decade, which was also the most impressive performance. So I kind of, as an aeronautical engineer, this is like going through the speed of sound. If we went any faster, we'd rip the wings off the airplane. Like if you have any experience with a boat or an airplane or an airfoil, there's a certain speed you can get to, at which point you just start to rip the wings off or you start to move against the forces of nature. And I think if I said to, you're saying to me, well, we're disappointed. You're up 340% in 12 months. Okay. So Levin, that, right? I get what you're saying.
Right.
We're disappointed that there aren't 100. We're disappointed that Apple Computer hadn't bought $50 billion of Bitcoin.
Yes.
Right? That's what we're disappointed about.
Yes.
And so let's talk about that. I think first of all, a lot of people, publicly traded companies, have a problem holding the property. And the problem holding the property is either it would take about a year, 6 months to a year, to establish a relationship with a crypto custodian. When you go to set up your Coinbase account or a Fidelity account or whatever, if you're publicly traded, you've got armies of lawyers and accountants going through due diligence and compliance check and security check and the like. I mean, bear in mind, most of these companies, most people that trade stocks have been using the same broker for 20 years. Most institutions have been using the same broker for 30 years. So having to actually come up with a new broker, a once in 30-year thing, I think that slows people down. I think the second thing is the FASB accounting treatment of indefinite intangible. It's hostile and prejudicial to a CFO or CEO that has a optically pristine P&L or balance sheet. If I buy $1 billion of Bitcoin, it goes down by 50%, then it goes up by 20. I report to the world that I have 500 million in assets and I had a $500 million operating loss. Even though neither of those things are true, what I really have is 10 billion in assets and a $9 billion investment gain. So I got to sympathize. I mean, the one intelligent pushback from someone as to why I don't buy Bitcoin, it's not the volatility of the asset, it's the optical or the accounting volatility, because 30 years of pristine operations at a company with a perfect P&L and a perfect balance sheet and gross margins that you can predict plus or minus 1% for 8 quarters, that gets totally blown out of the water if you replace your treasuries with Bitcoin. So I think that that's a drag for public entities that are GAAP accounting reliant. And I think the third drag is that there are trillions of dollars, Brett, that by charter and by law and maybe by tax code can't own property. They have to own security, right? The distinction being $1 billion of Bitcoin in an ETF or $1 billion of MicroStrategy stock as a security, $1 billion of a Bitcoin miner as a security, $1 billion of Bitcoin as property. Now, I mean, there's a lot of advantages to owning property outright versus the security, but the disadvantage is if I raise $10 billion from 100 pension funds and I'm an SEC 40 Act investment company and 90% of my portfolio has to be in securities, undoing that would take 3 years and Herculean effort. Right. And maybe I lose my investors. So I think that one of the impediments has been the lack of securities that offer Bitcoin exposure. I mean, the obvious elephant in the room is the lack of a Bitcoin ETF for the spot market. I don't know, you might have seen Tom Emmer's note to the SEC today, where he basically says, we need an ETF for the spot. That would be a security. Keeping in mind one more observation, if I look at my ticker right now, Marathon is trading at $64 a share. It's a $6.5 billion market cap. And today it traded $1 billion of liquidity. Riot today traded 600 million in liquidity with a market cap north of 3 billion. And then you've got, in rapid succession, you've got Bitfarms, which is $1 billion plus publicly traded miner. You've got Hut 8, that stock has tripled in the past 3 months. It's a $2.5 billion miner. Bit Digital, I could go on. There's about 12, Hive, Argo. I think that if you say, well, what's the progress in 12 months? Well, when MicroStrategy did our due diligence, Brett, I couldn't find a single company holding $3 million of Bitcoin on their balance sheet anywhere in the public markets. Couldn't find anybody. And so today we have like 36 companies, and you've got MicroStrategy and Tesla that have taken north of $1 billion positions. You've got Square and Marathon that have purchased, $400 or $500 million worth of Bitcoin on their treasury. You've got a dozen Bitcoin miners. You've got 2 futures ETFs. And how would I put this to bed? I would say this, Brett. Like, you remember the chair of the FDIC last week said they're investigating how banks can hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet and what the reserve ratio should be. And I looked at it. And I tweeted, I said, when the FDIC finally approves banks to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, everybody will want to buy it, nobody will want to sell it, and you won't be able to afford it. So in this particular case, I think the same holds true, which is you're seeing the motion, you're seeing the 350% uptick. You have a lot of obvious liabilities that are holding back Apple and Google and Facebook from buying 50 billion each. I thank my lucky stars for those liabilities. When I was banging away on a computer buying Bitcoin as fast as I could at $9,500 a coin, and I bought $175 million worth of it in like 2 days, hoping to hell no one figured out I was buying it. While I was doing that, I consoled myself with the thought that it took me 3 months to get KYC'd and get the account, and they put me through hell. And if it's that difficult to be able to buy Bitcoin, then I figured that I'd done the work and everybody else was going to come after me and they were going to pay double or triple. And a year later, it still takes 8 weeks to get a KYC AML account to do institutional grade Bitcoin acquisition as property. And you pay 6x that much or 7x that much. When FASB cures the accounting, and I think there's consensus that we'll eventually go to fair market accounting, I just don't know when the SEC gives you a spot ETF, when FDIC lets banks hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, right? At that point, you won't have these headaches, but you will be paying $500,000 a coin or $1 million a coin. And so be careful what you wish for.